Hello and welcome to episode 267 of Growth Marketing Toolbox. I'm your host, Nicholas Scalise, and today I'm joined by Julien Smith. Julien is a New York Times bestselling author and the co-founder and CEO of Practice, a world-class tool to help coaches build their businesses entirely on their own. Julien, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. How's everything going?
It's great. Thank you very much for having me.
I am looking forward to this. As we were saying right before we started, your book, your original book, Trust Agents, was actually one of the very first books that I ever read when I was getting into marketing back in 2009. It was very motivational for me just to sort of guide me in what to do in this crazy new marketing world that I was getting myself into. So it's an honor to have you on the show. Tell us a little bit about your journey as a marketer, Trust Agents, which is now sort of a classic in the marketing book space, in my opinion. And what you're doing now.
It's funny. I'm one of those weird people. I think I look about the same age, obviously, but it's been 13 years or something since
Crazy.
that book was published.
Wow.
And I'm one of those people that really was asked to write a book practically before I really had any crazy level of expertise. The social web was so early that our publisher at the time for this particular book, which was Wiley, was like, y'all should write a book about this. It was me and a co-author, Chris Brogan. And we had written ebooks talking about the social web and all these things. And the book was an instant, as you said, it was an instant New York Times bestseller, and which was super exciting for us. But it's funny looking back on it, because I've now run 2 venture-backed companies. I've raised like $150 million. Like I've written other books, like all this other stuff. But what I wrote it with then, which is actually like not that much expertise relative to what I know now. So it's a funny thing, but I'm happy that it's still a big portion of it really still stands up because it was based on principles, right?
Exactly. I think that's what is most important. I mean, I remember reading it and not thinking, oh, this is a specific tactic that I need to deploy today. But it was just a framework for how to think about marketing and what we do and building trust. And so, those are some timeless principles. So you mentioned you've done 2 venture-backed startups since then. You raised a bunch of money. Your current startup is called Practice, which our listeners can check out at practice.do. And we're going to be talking about lead generation and lead magnets and some interesting strategies you have there. But for anyone not familiar with Practice, what is it?
Yeah, sure, for sure. So to give you a sense as to the background as to how we got started in this, I'm fortunate that me and my co-founder have been surrounded by coaches our whole life. My father was an exec and career coach, so I grew up in that space in a weird way. It's ironic because now, we raised a $10 million round last year from Andreessen Horowitz, but Tony Robbins participated in this round, which is ironic to me because that's like the very beginning of like what coaching was back in the 80s when this first thing like really began. But the reason that it's interesting for us is because it's a tip of the spear approach to really doing something that I've always been passionate about, and Trust Agents is really a part of, which is to help people that are solopreneurs and that do their own work. One of the things that book was trying to teach people is how to use the social web for business, but principally within the context of you have nobody to rely on. Like there's no other outside experts. It's like you're not going to like hire a team. You're going to do this for yourself.
Right, yourself. Yep.
And that it's interesting to sort of Tamsin McMahon, who's an old friend of mine who wrote a book about the idea of a red thread, which is the principles that underlie your career. Really, what has existed throughout my career is like a motivation to help the individual operator, the person who does not like have a bunch of experts to rely on, but who really needs to do it themselves. And so that's kind of the arc of Practice. And as we begin with coaches, and we'll move on to other types of solopreneurs, it's been really great doing good work because it's people that really have no one else that they do business with. They don't have executive assistants. They don't have anyone. They're just like solo people running their own business, often selling their own expertise.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the timing, right? Because with COVID and with more people working from home and people getting laid off or going
Mhm.
remote and then not wanting to go back to the office, so therefore then they say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I want to start my own thing, and I've always wanted to do coaching." It
Mhm.
seems like this is a perfect time. Are you seeing a
Yeah.
surge with, I guess, over the last few years or few months
Mhm.
with this change in how people are working and more people wanting to start their own coaching business?
Well, it is growing really fast as a business.
Mhm.
So in that sense, yeah. And the other thing that's happening inside of Silicon Valley, which some listeners here might appreciate, and others
Mhm.
might, Silicon Valley might not be like their inside world, which it definitely is for me. The world of startups is experiencing this like opening up, where people are talking about mental health for like the first time
Yeah.
ever,
Hmm.
and accepting that running a business is hard, and that it comes with challenges. And so there's this explosion that's happening in Silicon Valley, where before it was like this cult of the solo person who ran the business by himself, and who was so like just a superhero, the Elon Musk type people of the world, right, or whatever, whoever your personal version of that might be.
Hmm.
And now it's like all CEOs, it's like finally right being recognized. They all have exec coaches,
Yeah.
and so it's this kind of funny, almost like explosion that's happening in this space. So you're right, from a timing standpoint, it works out.
Yeah, and from a utility standpoint, like it just makes so much sense that a platform like this should exist because
Mm-hmm.
as a marketer, I'm always looking at different tools for promoting businesses and for managing your bookings, invoicing, calendars, all
Yeah.
that stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
there's never really been something that I can think of that's been focused specifically on coaches. Tell us a little
Mm-hmm.
bit about how you identified this problem. Obviously, you said you come from this world of
Mm-hmm.
coaches and you grew up around it, but how did you find the need for this and then say, hey, this is a software solution and a community that
Yeah.
we can build.
Well, I had spent a long time as a solopreneur myself. Keep in mind, like, again, it's one of the situations. Most people that are asked to write books are usually asked to write books because they have achieved some level of success out there in the real world. This is this really funny phase. I'm really happy that Trust Agents as a book really worked out and still stands up.
Right. Yeah.
But thinking back to my 29 or 28-year-old self, Brogan was like a little bit older. My co-author
Hmm.
was a little bit older. But thinking back to my 20-year-old self, it was like very naive, right? But I was a solopreneur,
Mm.
and so myself, I was always like, well, how do I build this person? How do I like what am I how am I supposed to run this business?
Yeah.
And there's this really funny thing, like maybe we take for granted in the growth marketing world, in the sort of startup ecosystem, that like everybody kind of knows how to use the tools. And what's fascinating is often just from a sort of business standpoint, all these businesses end up serving enterprise. So Dropbox, which you think of as being the company that helps serve individuals, ultimately the majority of their revenue, it's like gets taken up by Fortune 500, and so they end
Hmm.
up serving Fortune 500. Slack, that you might have thought of as like a viral thing for small teams, eventually just served gigantic corporations. So it's like no one's just sitting there actually serving individuals.
True.
And so I just find it one of the things in startups. And actually, we talk in speaking to this whole thing about how we do marketing at practice, which I think will be of interest here. At startups, often what happens is you lose track of the individual, and you end up focusing on companies because companies have bigger pocketbooks. But
Right.
we're really motivated by, and I think that's a big part of what we do, is being motivated by serving single people, single individuals.
That's good. I've seen so many of my favorite marketing SaaS products that go upstream, as they say.
They
They
do.
start with the small
Yeah.
solopreneur, small agency, and then unfortunately for us, but fortunately for them, I guess, they
Yeah.
move to enterprise. I've seen it happen
Mhm.
so many times. But in this case, it's hard to say if like, I guess there isn't really like an enterprise level of coaching, right? It's you're
There
when you're
actually,
a
it's funny
coach,
that
or
you
is there?
say
Yeah,
that, because there
there
is
is.
actually, what
Okay.
happens is that teams get together
Hmm.
and they end up becoming teams of people. They have a set
Interesting.
of people that are coaches, typically to middle managers as a
Okay.
team. And then you have a sales guy, and the sales guy goes to like Peloton or whatever,
Yeah.
as a company, and is like, we're going to level up all of your managers, and we have a set of
Wow.
coaches in the background. So it's funny, it's this whole professional services thing that you don't really think about,
I
but
never thought of that. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
and there are
incredible.
gigantic, there are big companies that do this, and there's more and more
Yeah.
of them. It's like a,
Interesting.
it's remarkable to deep dive. So that's one of the things that's fascinating about startups is like you do these deep dives into spaces that no one else
Yeah.
really knows much about, that are not exciting at parties, but that are, like people like a buddy of mine inherited a company that basically like sells lug nuts. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Like it
Oh,
literally
yeah.
just the
Super
dullest,
glamorous stuff, right?
like truly like the dullest possible thing you could
Right.
imagine. But he's just like, yeah, just prints money. It's amazing when you think
And
about
you
it,
and you
right?
really get to know a lot about it. We've done
And
that. We've done
actually,
similar
I will
stuff like
say that when you run a company, it's almost like the more boring it is, the better the marketing needs
it
to be,
is.
in a
I've
way,
seen that as
right?
well because you become so specialized and you get good at positioning it in a way that nobody else
Yes.
is thinking about. I'm sure he could
Mhm.
tell you 20 different things about lug nuts that none of us would know, but would be pretty fascinating. I see this
Yeah.
happening a lot on TikTok right now, and I'd love to get your
Mm.
thoughts on TikTok,
Sure.
and as a social platform. But I see the most typical boring industries like pressure washing, or I see one channel for
Mhm.
paintless dent removal that is just blowing up because
Mhm.
it's so unique and so specialized. People take interest in it. On that note, yeah,
Mhm.
what do you think about TikTok? It's obviously a social phenomenon right
For
now,
sure.
very
Yeah.
popular. Yeah, what are your thoughts on the
Yeah. So
platform?
what happened in the news today, on the day that the recording of this thing, is
Mhm.
that it was finally acknowledged that more time is spent on on TikTok per day than was ever spent on Facebook ever in the history of their platform.
Crazy.
So the
Yeah.
history is 39 minutes per day was the height of Facebook use for their user base. 39 minutes per day. TikTok currently is at 44
Hmm.
minutes per day.
Wow.
And if you think about the sort of their ability to do this, so much of it has to do with how many items that you consume per minute on TikTok. The videos are short.
Hmm.
The swipeability is incredibly sharp and really intuitive. And so when you're consuming, I don't know what the average is, I don't know, 100 videos an hour,
Probably. Yeah.
your ability to get really smart about what to serve next is way better than it would ever be on YouTube, where the average video is meaningfully longer, right?
Hmm.
And it's obviously much better than it is on even on Instagram or on anywhere else. And so as a result of that, you have this incredibly self-correcting algorithm that it gets sharper and sharper and sharper at delivering stuff. And so the part that I really find fascinating about this from a marketing standpoint is it becomes closer and closer to what how people really think and how people really talk about companies
Yeah.
and talk about products, which is it starts to mirror real world word of mouth.
Hmm.
The real world word of mouth happens in a certain way. You're like, oh, before we talk about this, I need to tell you about this thing super interesting, or here's this funny
True.
story. And that's how real world word
Spontaneity.
of
Yeah.
mouth
There's a lot of
works.
spontaneity there. Yeah.
And so effectively, the more you are able to mirror this inside of an app, the more powerful this app will become. And so
Yeah.
to me, it I don't know. It's fascinating to watch the rise. It's fascinating to watch the speed
It
of
is.
it. Right. It's also fascinating to have seen things like Vine back in the day, because you and I
Oh, I
are
remember that.
relatively
Yeah.
old, seeing
Hmm.
when Vine was like taking off and then it was killed
Yep.
by Twitter, when it very much could have been an app like this, but did not become it.
It's interesting. It's a special time we live in. So we're
Yeah.
slowly getting to the topic that we want to focus
Hmm.
on. I
For
love
sure.
that we're jumping around here, but I wanted to ask you about the marketing that you're doing at Practice,
Hmm.
specifically with acquisition and lead generation and lead magnets. You're doing some pretty
Yeah.
unique stuff. Tell us a little bit
Hmm.
about your approach and your overall thinking of how you're
Yeah.
growing Practice from a lead generation standpoint.
Yeah. So here's what I'll begin by saying is that I mean, as everybody, you and I know, and everybody who's listening to this knows, it's like marketing is not magic.
Hmm.
Marketing is actually just a lot of hustle and having an understanding as to what the fundamental consumer wants. We have
Hmm.
actually a, a well, maybe it's not the simplest of jobs, but it's certainly a simpler job, certainly more direct, because of the fact that our buyer is also our user, right? And so that's not the case when you have like you have an enterprise company and someone high up, the CFO,
Oh, I
needs
see
to
what you're
make a
saying.
decision about
Right.
something,
Hmm.
but the actual user of that thing is below someone in the org chart. So
Hmm.
we are serving a coach who is a business of one, and that business of one is also the user of the service. And so that creates a simplicity around what we have to do. And when we think about what we do, when we refer to it as lead magnets inside of my company, is we have tremendous amount of conversations with our clients and people that are in our space, and et cetera. And we watch them inside of our community. We watch them inside of the office hours that they do. They talk to each other in front of us, really. Like we just sit there on Zoom calls, and they're like, hey, so you see these almost like peer-to-peer learning groups. And then when people start to dig into something, a good example recently is like that was very successful for us is hey, what do you use for a contract? It's just like, bam, we create the best, most possible, most effective, almost like highest end version of that we possibly can. That is incredibly targeted, and as you and I have talked about from a numbers standpoint, like they are disproportionately effective in this tiny space.
Yeah,
and so the core of it. I mean, hold on. Let me step back here for a second. The core of it is really in being able to understand that a business of one fundamentally has no time and has no ability to really understand everything. That the typical person who's starting their business, this is sort of the macro lens of it, is really like they just don't know what to do and they don't know who to ask. And often it's going to be like SEO, and they're going to search and they're going to try and find some answer. And so the smaller and more precise our marketing is, and that's why we talk to coaches specifically versus, let's say, all consultants, or versus like a much wider segment. By being able to target the product towards coaches, you could also target the marketing really precisely as well. And so then we're like, okay, great. So what is it you exactly need? And we just deliver those things again and again and again. And we get like 100x our efforts and results. It's surprisingly effective.
Yeah, I think there's a huge takeaway here, because the thing I see happen all the time with our clients is they're just coming up with lead magnet ideas, just whatever they think is going to work. But what you've explained is that you've created this feedback loop where you've built this audience. You then get the audience connected. You have an amazing community with practice, which we're going to get into. You see how the community interacts with each other and what needs they have. And the contract lead magnet is a perfect example. You saw that need and you say, hey, coaches want contract templates. So then you guys created that. You turned it into a lead magnet, and now that continues that feedback loop of getting more people into the platform, into the community. Hopefully they become users. They start talking and say, hey, this is another need we have. And then you go back to the drawing board and create another one. So it's this feedback loop where the lead magnets are not just you guys coming up with them, but they're based on the actual needs. I think that is such an important takeaway.
It's a budget thing that is really, it's like almost like a judo move. Because fundamentally, someone who is a solopreneur is like, they're like, I want to spend nothing if I can. I want to get this thing for free. But and so the power that we have from a standpoint of our the things that we have access to is, because we're a venture-backed company, we can spend what is a tiny percentage, a tiny amount of money for us, but is a gigantic amount of money for a coach that does not have a budget. And so you can very easily create, and it's interesting, because I was talking to a bunch of SEO people recently. I come from back in 2008, 2009, when I first wrote that first book. There was a lot of SEO in my world, and my first successes were SEO successes. And from 2009 up until 2022, it's still true that a big portion of the internet is garbage. And most of the things that you land on, even things that are like first ranked things from an SEO standpoint, are actually just still garbage pages. And Google has really, to a degree, forced the hand of the people that deliver this content. And that's actually fine. Like it's good. What it means is that if you drive enormous amount of education and value, an enormous amount of high quality content, that it's disproportionately effective. The unfortunate thing is you need to be able to get the cash to do that. So, but from that standpoint, I'm in a good position. Absolutely. I know how to raise money. We know how to do the things that we need to do. And so it's just about, okay, great. But anyone can listen to the customer base, and anyone can have a community, and then just draw ideas from that.
Draw ideas from it and create a lead magnet. And what I love about lead magnets is they're not complicated. This is not a production that you had to go hire a production company for. We're talking, if we go back to the free coaching contract templates example that Practice has, I mean,
Yeah.
it's documents. These are not,
Yeah.
it's not rocket science here. The hard part
Hmm.
is coming up with what is the actual problem that you're trying to solve with that lead magnet for a
Yeah.
coach. Now, tell us a little bit about the journey of if someone is a coach and they're looking for contracts online,
Hmm.
they
Yeah.
find that
Yeah.
template, they fill it out, they get into your funnel. What are you then doing to nurture them to become a practice user?
Yeah, it's still based on education for sure,
Okay.
and we have an attitude which is similar to the attitude of the company Superhuman.
Oh
Superhuman
yeah.
is a sort of premium email product that one of the founders, is one of our investors, and we know him
Nice.
quite well. And a lot of it is we are. I don't want to say we're anti-sales, but we're not hardcore in terms of how we sell our thing, and we really rely on the product being able to drive really good value. Because when you're serving thousands of people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, like the product is what's going to do the majority of the heavy lifting. It's
Hmm.
not sales that's going to do that because the average customer is small. So
Right.
you really have to drive just amazing, amazing product. You could feel that you have amazing product when the person you talk to them about it and they exhale like, "Oh my god, oh," and so that's sort of the attitude that we have. Every single thing that we drive value that we deliver to that person is going to be like problem solving and getting them to go, oh my god, like, and exhaling. The next one that we deliver now, that we're actually working on today, is one about taxes, because taxes are an
Mm.
incredibly complex subject, and people don't really understand how to handle them, especially when they start their first business, and it's always insanely stressful and a headache. And so you could just do so much with things that you think are standard. Like you and I, if we run companies with teams, like we don't think that much about taxes. We're just like, hand it to the guy. Most people just don't have that. So you're just like, it's really about stepping into the world of
Yeah.
your customer in a super deep way.
Yeah, and it goes back to understanding their problem or problems, and each of those problems can be a lead magnet, right?
Yes.
Those can each be
Hmm.
transformed. We talked about the contracts
Yeah.
example. You just mentioned taxes. I'm sure you're probably already
Hmm.
have or are working on some lead magnets around that.
Yeah, for sure.
With
Yeah.
with this product though, it seems like you're solving a lot of different problems for coaches,
Hmm.
from payments to scheduling to just staying organized to
Yeah.
learning how to be a better coach. How do
Hmm.
you put all that together and not make it seem overwhelming? Like, how do you focus
Yeah.
in on the specific problems that are going to
Yeah.
resonate with a coach?
Yeah, a lot of it is about being able to create simplicity as
Yeah.
well, right? And so the I don't know if you, even my desk, like I think of myself as a pretty structured person, but as I look down, I've got like 10 things on it. It's like
Me too.
it,
Me too.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so you're never going to get away from that. So
Right.
somehow you have to be able to create product and create marketing that is just exceptionally clear. And it's interesting, having gone from what I would consider to be an IC, is what an individual contributor is, what
Hmm.
we would call what I used to do in my world, to today being a CEO. And so much of that has to do with just finding the right person to do the job. And so in our
Mm.
case, so much of what we do relies on simplicity and good copywriting and good design. And it's
Absolutely.
just like people see it. And once again, you just have people that exhale like, oh my God, it just relieves so much pressure in their world. And that's really what good product does. And then ideally then the marketing it kind of, to a degree, happens by itself.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're a big proponent of product led growth. I don't know if you
Hmm.
like using that term or not, but everything you're sharing is definitely around that. And a big part of that is having a community of users who you're going to get
Hmm.
feedback and you're involved. Obviously, there's a really nice community behind practice. It's on
Hmm.
the homepage. There's a community
Yeah.
tab, which is actually something
Hmm.
I was surprised by when I saw that there was a link to the
Hmm.
community on the homepage. Tell us
Yeah.
about the intentionality of surfacing the community as
Hmm.
you did, and also just what it's like, growing a community for a SaaS product.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a few people on my team on my, what I call it, we're a small company still. We've raised
Mhm.
a decent amount of money, but we're still a small go-to-market team. So I have Rahul, I'm going to shout them out. I have Rahul on my team, and I have Eva, and I have Jeremy. Jeremy is the person who really is, for years, has been a community-driven person, has been doing
Mm.
this again and again and again. I came from BBSs back in the day. I used to run communities on the early internet when I was like 14 years old. And so what we do is really based in the fact that so much of this industry, what you have to do is you have to pattern match. If you're listening to this this may not be complete, these things I'm saying may not be completely applicable, but a set of them are applicable, and you find your own pattern inside of your own space. In our case, because coaching is still like emergent and still very unknown, even things such as that are super fundamental, like how much do I charge? Like, and then are you charging a retainer? Like things like that are really like unknowns for most people. And so people learn it maybe through a certification that they do or some other thing like that, but then they have no peers with way more expertise than them. And so much of it is about peer learning and almost like creating a little AA group where people feel that they can talk to one another and just be honest about what it is that they experience. When we first started, we do these almost like fireside chats where we bring really successful, typically one-on-one, but also sometimes group coaches, and we bring them in to a chat like this, right? And for half an hour, I used to, it's almost embarrassing. It's like I used to bring up like high level questions, and then we go to the Q&A. And when we went in Q&A, people were like, yo, okay, in the section about non-disclosure in your contract, can you tell me the exact language? Like they would just come up with the most tactical thing that they possibly could. And I was like, wow, I'm completely off base with this like philosophical part of my language bullshit that I use in the first half of these conversations. And so it's fascinating. It goes back to this expression that they maybe I feel like someone said it was a Picasso expression, but who knows? It's like when painters get together, they talk about turpentine. And what that means is it's like same thing as when marketers get together, they talk about like lead funnels,
lead magnets. There we go,
right? Or whatever. Just the most tactical, like yo. Okay, but can you tell me? Are you a pro emoji? What's the conversion rate on emoji in the titles? Exactly. Does that help?
Yeah,
or no? And not talking about high-minded things at all. So that's really what it's based in. And the more we can expose that type of conversation, then the more we can literally look at it and just be like, okay, let's use a tiny percentage of the budget that we have to drive like this insane disproportionate value. It's also true that the smaller the customer size, the more it relies on virality and word of mouth. It's not true for enterprise sales. But when you look at a thing like Dropbox or something, the early days of Dropbox, we looked at something like Slack, when the teams were smaller and the customer size is small, that you wanted to have something that was high word of mouth. And so effectively, it's from a CEO standpoint, I go back to the financial model. And when I look at the financial model, I go, okay, how many customers to $1 million in ARR, for example? And then I'm like, great, what's the average customer size? And I'm like, the fundamental question here is, what channel is going to drive that?
Yeah.
Right. And Brian Balfour is the one that really was excellent at talking about this. He has a thing about not just this idea of product market fit, but product channel fit and market channel fit and all of these other parts that need to fit together like a puzzle piece for a business to succeed.
Yeah.
And so that's how that's the fundamentals of what we do.
No, it makes perfect sense. And, as you say this, I'm thinking of all the parallels with trust agents and the trust, the rules that you shared in that book.
Yeah.
It's so timeless because I remember there was something about, don't sell and create a community and build trust through the content you share. And so I just see a lot of the same things still being implemented these days because they're timeless principles.
Yeah, they're now today, gratefully, it's interesting to think about this sometimes. Like we were just talking about things that we were doing in small groups back when this book was written.
Yeah.
But now it's like out there on the social web, those things have become like quote unquote best practices, which is pretty fascinating.
Awesome. Well, one other thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap up is the technical stack, how everything is working behind the scenes from a marketing standpoint with this lead funnel, with the lead magnets. I believe your community is using a tool called Circle. Tell us what other tools are you using to make all this work for email, podcasting, all that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, HubSpot is like the core of everything that we work with. And I think it's going to continue to be that way for a really long time. What's really nice when you're not reinventing the wheel is that people can just jump in and know what it is that they have to deal with. Internally for product usage, one of the things that we use is Heap.
Okay.
And Heap is
Yep.
amazing because it allows you to effectively like it'll automatically segment your customers out by month or whatever you want and be like, is your customer LTV improving and all this other stuff that's really meaningful there. And then from the perspective of, I mean, to tell you the truth, our stack is really straightforward. There's not a lot of surprises there. We really focus on the content being the most the thing that should stand out. And so long as we do that effectively, time and time again, and so long as we're learning, even in the early days of a business like this, the more effective we become.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Heap, which is a fantastic tool. We actually had the founder of Heap on the podcast all the way back in 2017.
Amazing.
It was crazy. And it's just amazing seeing how much they've grown. I'll link to that episode in the show notes for anyone who wants to check out Heap. It's a really good product analytics tool. And then, HubSpot obviously is a powerhouse in the email automation, CRM space. So we'll put all these links in the show notes. We will also put a link to check out Practice, or you could go to practice.do. That's practice.do. You also have a podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, I have to tell you, like, because back in the day, like my first thing that I really made on the internet was a podcast way long ago. To get back to honest, pure conversations is actually one of my favorite parts of my job. Nice. It is so nice to be able to kind of get out there and just have conversations, talking shop with people. But what's amazing about coaching is that it is almost like therapy, but on a professional standpoint. You have a set of people when two coaches are talking to them. I coach first-time CEOs. If they're venture-backed CEOs and they've raised some money, but they've never done it before, I have a small number of people I do that with. And all of those are private conversations that are kind of like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have 6 months of cash. I just realized this. Is my company going to die? Like very super high
serious
crisis,
stuff.
high stakes stuff sometimes. And when you have two people like that, one of them being me and another person being some other coach that we found that is noteworthy in some way, talking about these private conversations, you basically like have super authentic things with people that are both good listeners and on either side. So revelatory stuff gets exposed as a result of that, which makes it super fun. And as you know, last time I ran a podcast, I ran it by myself, but there were no guests. It was just me talking and playing music and shit back in the day when that's when a podcast was. And these days, to have someone who is who's good at asking questions and who's good at just exposing the stuff that matters about your guest is one of the easiest podcasts and best podcasts that you can have. Just bringing people on and getting them to speak their truth or whatever,
It's super powerful, and it's good from a promotional standpoint because then you have two people promoting it as well. Well, this has been amazing. I'm sure you're welcome back anytime. I'm sure there's a lot of other marketing topics we can talk shop about. For anyone who wants to connect with you or follow you on social media or follow what Practice is up to, where is the best place for them to do all that?
Yeah, Practice is simple. You can go look it up. It's at practice.do. It's simple to find. I think the part where I shoot my mouth off the most, it's tough when you run a company. You feel like almost like being able to say random shit on the internet is more difficult, but I still try to do as much of it as possible on Twitter. Nice. I'm at Twitter/Julien. And feel free to reach out to me anytime at the obvious email address, which is Julien@practice.do.
Fantastic. Well, Julien, thank you so much. It's been a blast having you on the show, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great to be on.